Hello everyone, Aga here, and today is gonna be a new video. I'm gonna be discussing some things that have happened recently, and I'll give you a nice little juicy intro to start with. Ever since the invasion of Ukraine by the Russian forces in 2022, Russia has been playing Russian roulette with its feature. And just today, as I'm recording this video, the Russian government has decided to switch the classic revolver of the Russian roulette game with a semi-automatic pistol, as Armenia, Azerbaijan, and the United States have agreed on a Trump route through Armenia to Nakhchivan, essentially a little peace deal that's been brokered by the US. So, this is good news for the Caucasus region, mainly for Azerbaijan and Armenia, although how some would take it is very different. But the main idea is Russia is essentially gonna see its future destroyed, and this has just been the final, let's say, capstone of a very long series, surprisingly, a really sneaky, under the radar series of Russia's role in the Caucasus and how it is slowly diminishing. And today I will give you guys context, some historical context, current context, and just what's been going on in the region and how we ended up here and what the future holds for us. So without further ado, let's look into some articles. Alright, so we're going to be looking at two articles today. This is the first one we're looking at. This is Aliyev, Pashinyan, and Trump agree on Trump route through Armenia to Nakhchivan. Now, this was a press conference they had in the White House earlier today. As of recording this is Friday, August 8th. So this is fresh stuff. Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan, Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev, and US President Donald Trump have agreed on a route from Azerbaijan through Armenia to the Azerbaijani exclave of Nakhchivan in a historic meeting at the White House. In a press conference following their meeting on Friday, the three leaders sat together and answered questions along with a three-way handshake from Trump that Trump said would cement seriousness of what was agreed upon. Aliyev and Pashinyan also initiated the comprehensive peace deal agreed by the two sides in March. While scant on details, the meeting was a significant step towards establishing peace. Aliyev, Pashinyan, and Trump all agreed. The joint press conference capped off individual meetings that both Pashinyan and Aliyev had with Trump and other White House officials, including Special Envoy Steve Witkoff. During the press conference, Trump was reportedly asked about the simultaneous ongoing peace process between Russia and Ukraine, and although he did answer some of the questions on the matter, he reiterated that the focus should be on Armenia and Azerbaijan, while showering praise on how brave and courageous Aliyev and Pashinyan were. Now, this little highlight here is what we're going to be talking about in the second part of this video, because a lot of this deal with what the US is doing, they are essentially trying to give a big old FU, this finger, to Russia with everything that's happening, and I'll explain why. Aliyev and Pashinyan suggested that Trump should be nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize for helping negotiate the deal, with Aliyev quipping that he hoped they would be invited to the ceremony. You see, this statement, which I managed to hear live, because this was streamed by the White House and I think it was NBC. I know it wasn't MSNBC because MSNBC is very far left anti-Trump people, but one of the NBCs were streaming this, so I was actually watching it live, and it kind of hurt me because you could tell who the Azerbaijanis were, and you could tell that the Azerbaijani press were doing a little bit of PR for the government, but there were some decent questions asked. It was mainly just about how great Trump is in establishing this peace and the acknowledgement, at least with the situation, that we're going to have new American stuff in the region. Essentially, Trump continuing from Russia's save file, which when it comes to raising children is something that would get you thought of as a weak man, but when it comes to politics, it is exactly what you want to do. You want to hijack other people's progress. God, I love politics and politicians. Anyways, when asked by an Armenian journalist what would prevent either side from reneging on the deal, Trump demurred, suggesting instead that Aliyev and Pashinyan understood the historic nature of the deal, that both would call me if any problems were to arise. This is essentially Trump telling them in the nicest way possible that, like, yeah, we're going to be overlooking you. If you do anything stupid, we will deal with you. This is essentially just the kind and polite way of saying know your place to these countries. But one thing that kind of negged on, which this next thing will focus on, so I'll just read that. Trump was also asked by a reporter from the Azerbaijani pro-government media outlet Report which country he planned to visit, but he again declined to answer. Now, with this, what I have to pick is two things. Firstly, this. But secondly, what I have to pick is I was watching this live, and it was painful that from the way people were speaking, I could tell they were Azerbaijani. Now, don't get me wrong. I love my Azerbaijani people, and I can instantly understand them. I'm not sure if this is a thing for the rest of the world. I might have some bias in this, which I obviously do, but, like, you get what I'm trying to say. So I don't know what kind of bias I have in this, but whatever it is definitely impacting my thing here, because I would have a tiny little wince when the Azerbaijani journalists were speaking, and it was very obvious that they were with, like, the government were like, we are reports from Azerbaijani media and stuff, just this kind of stuff, and, like, they were very easy to tell apart, which was really painful for me, but, like, as long as the questions were asked, as long as we had a presence there, I'll take it. I'll personally take it. I have friends in the US. I have, I know about of the diaspora in the US. Hats off to them. They're doing a great job. So, big up you guys. I love y'all. I support y'all from St. John's, Newfoundland. Trump also, elsewhere during the press conference, Trump said we're going to have to get there when asked if a visit to Azerbaijan and Armenia was on the cards. In addition, Trump mentioned that he had decided to end the decades-long restriction on U.S. defense cooperation with Azerbaijan, which would allow U.S. companies to sell weapons to the country. The blockage has been in place since the early 1990s and has meant that Azerbaijan is the only post-Soviet country not to receive U.S. aid under the Freedom Support Act passed in 1992. Now, I have a few opinions on this. The first one, Azerbaijan has oil. And Azerbaijani oil and Azerbaijani lines are what is being used to currently bypass sanctions placed on Russia and Ukraine to get oil slid across to Europe. Because remember, when Nord Stream got shut down because Russia just cut off the valves because they were being sanctioned, German power bills rose like 6 times, and, like, Germany wasn't having it. So Europe needs Russian oil, and if Russia is sanctioned, the next closest thing with infrastructure, with the logistics already installed for European expansion of oil, is Azerbaijan. There was a BP sanction on Azerbaijan about oil, by the way. I will pull that article up in a separate video. Actually, I'll just show it at the end of the video. I won't delve too much into that. But Azerbaijan has oil, and Azerbaijan works with Russians. So that's an obvious country you don't want to give weapons to if you're the US. But the other thing that I find funny is maybe this might have been a strategic play from the Aliyevs, which I don't know if it was or not, but one thing that I really respect was, that I really found ingenious, that I will correct myself on the record, because the Azerbaijanis, we trade weapons with Israel. Now, when I say we trade weapons with Israel, I mean in our big second Nagorno-Karabakh war where in 44 days we captured all the lost territory, like, I'm talking that like Karabakh War, the 2021, that was the one. In 44 days, Azerbaijan was flying Azerbaijani flags, Azerbaijan was flying Turkish flags, and Azerbaijan was flying Israeli and Pakistani flags. Turkey, a Turk, a Pakistani, and an Israeli walk into a bar is the start of a joke. But in Azerbaijan, it was our allies in the region. This is kind of what Azerbaijan that I believe we should get lots of credit for, is we have about 165 now international, like, diplomatic, like, contacts and connections. We had a recent thing with China where Azerbaijani citizens can go to China visa-free. That is a big thing that we managed to achieve, and I am very proud of my country for it. because we are kind of elevating ourselves on the global field. And the second article will get into Azerbaijan's rights in the region as well. But I'm really proud of my country. Now, essentially, one more thing about this whole weapons thing, because we trade weapons with Israel and stuff, and because of how much US and Israel have a strong relationship. By strong relationship, I mean one side has leverage, power, and lots of influence over the other, and it is not the side with the higher population, is what I will say. Alright, the Trump route for international peace and prosperity, otherwise known as TRIPPIN, along with initiating peace agreement that was agreed by the two sides months ago, the most significant outcome of the meeting was an agreement to create the so-called Trump route for international peace and prosperity, otherwise known as TRIP, or as I am doing right now, TRIPPIN. That was so terrible, I'm so sorry. But this is essentially a route that would connect the mainland Azerbaijan to its enclave Nakhchivan through Armenia. This was a big talking point of the Nagorno-Karabakh War peace treaties, and this is essentially trying to be settled by the US. I'm sure these articles will get to it. None of the three leaders elaborated on how the route would function or how it would be overseen. That is very true. This wasn't really discussed. This was essentially Pashinyan kept asking, is there a draft to sign? Is there a draft to sign? And at some point, the media thought he was like kind of going on a repeat tangent of a joke. But I think Pashinyan was genuinely like, I didn't risk my reputation coming to America to like negotiate with these people my people hate. Which, side point, Armenia is currently in a boogaloo situation because the church hates the government and they hate Pashinyan in particular. So Pashinyan, one of the things he was accused of was being circumcised, and I am being 100% genuine when I say this. The Armenian church accused Pashinyan of not being Christian and being circumcised. So Pashinyan naturally threatened to whip his Pashinyan Jr. out on national television to prove the rumors aren't true. So this is the kind of characters we're dealing with in Armenia. And then because of this whole Armenian church versus state thing, which I might do a separate video on later, Armenians really dislike Pashinyan. So Pashinyan is trying to secure something for himself, because if there's at least a draft or like something to sign, that means he has something to bring back on the plane to Armenia with. It's like Neville Chamberlain carrying out that Hitler agreement, like, way, this has happened. Now, obviously, I'm not comparing my people to Hitler. God, no, I would never do that, because we wouldn't even dare touch it, because we wouldn't invade. We've already won. Why would we need to do anything else? Sorry, I'm being carried away. But essentially, Pashinyan kept talking about like getting a draft, and I think it was because of this reason, because of the fact that the route wasn't functioned. The route wasn't really established. Back to article. Armenia is also creating an exclusive partnership with the US to develop this corridor, which could extend up to 99 years. Damn businessmen and their lease. We anticipate significant infrastructure development by American companies. They are very anxious to get in. They are gonna spend a lot of money, Trump said. Now, I think one of the biggest things that the only thing that would get the route going is if it would make Azerbaijani oil more accessible, because Armenia is a really good passage to have, a really good territory to go through. So if there is an oil line that could be established between Azerbaijan and Armenia, which is a very interesting concept, by the way, and if the US is like leasing and brokering this deal, there's a lot of money involved for them. There is a lot more peace involved for the two countries that are Azerbaijan and Armenia. But essentially, that's just my little theory. Anyways, essentially, Armenia is creating this thing, and we anticipate significant infrastructure by American companies, yada yada yada. However, Trump and Pashinyan both stressed that this route would not affect Armenia's sovereignty. That's a big demand that he had. A demand frequently echoed by Armenian officials, including Pashinyan, when discussing the nature of the potential route. This is essentially one of the mania factors, if you will. I'll use a little history term for y'all history nerds out there. World War I, study those. But essentially, one of the biggest things Armenia has an issue with is if there's a corridor that's going through Armenia when there is already one going through Iran right now, Armenian sovereignty is being undermined significantly by Azerbaijan, which did, attack Armenians. Well, it was Armenians that were squatting and didn't really have rights to be in the country, but that threat of Azerbaijan being there, especially considering this is Azerbaijan, this is Turkey, and this is Armenia, we know what the Turks did to Armenians. I honestly understand the Armenian position, and I'm really sympathizing with them over their position about having to have this territorial sovereignty. And essentially, the announcement in Washington followed months of speculation of possible U.S. involvement in the mediation between Armenia and Azerbaijan and talks about the route. This began with what appeared to be an offhand remark by U.S. Ambassador to Turkey Tom Barrack about a possible U.S. takeover of the road. So what happens is America comes in and says, okay, we'll take it over, give us the 32 kilometers of road on a 100-year lease, and you all can share it. Barrack said in a press conference on 12th of July. The most American way of approaching it, this is the most, what the fuck is a kilometer way of approaching this situation? The fact that he knows what a kilometer is what's surprising to me. Anyways, Armenia has since issued several statements on the matter, mostly stressing that the route should not constitute a concession of sovereignty on its part. On 19th of July, Aliyev said that no operator, no trader, no lessee can be on our territory. Our cargo and citizens should not see the face of an Armenian border guard there every time. This is our demand. This is a legitimate demand, a fair demand. Otherwise, our citizens will be in danger. And I think the danger that the government, like the Azerbaijani side, can really point to at is how terrible Iran is right now. So if Azerbaijan, who already has really interesting relations with Iran, I would say, really hostile relations with Iran, if Azerbaijanis have to go through Iran to get to their enclave, and with everything that's currently happening in Iran, it's a very dangerous thing. There does need to be a route, and I do agree with this. Now, Aliyev is having a very, my way or the highway stance with it, pun intended. But this is essentially the one thing we need to have because, Zangezur corridor and all that fancy thingamajiggies. Anyways, in response, Armenia stressed that they cannot be unaware of who entered its territory. That's valid in my opinion. Lest an uncontrollable source of smuggling and trafficking could emerge. Now, this is just a cover for the real reason, which is hostilities or whatever might occur, but this is still valid, and I don't think even a border check by Azerbaijani border patrol will deal with that issue properly. The last thing we need is Azerbaijani border patrol in Armenia. You don't want to deal with that mess. As an Azerbaijani, I'm telling you this, so there is some serious stuff going on. Anyways, Armenia maintained its position until Friday, with Pashinyan spokesperson Nazeli Bagdasaryan rejecting claims that Armenia has agreed or would agree to a corridor solution. There are lots of solutions to agree on. Bagdasaryan said that all such claims and publications do not correspond to reality, adding that Pashinyan had already clearly stated Yerevan's position on the matter in July. Armenia is ready to unblock transit links as long as the process did not compromise its sovereignty, which is fair. In addition, several Armenian advocacy groups of the West, particularly the ANCA, which I don't care about reading the full name of it because I believe they are a government psyop. I believe they are a money laundering scheme. I'm just being a little bit salty, but they essentially continue to argue against the signing of a deal that would compromise Armenia's sovereignty. Now, the ANCA is, I believe, based out of California. I really understand my people now and just locals in general of a country when they talk about how the diaspora is always running their mouths on stuff. Because half the Armenians or half the ANCA that is dealing with all of this, giving these strong opinions, they have not set foot once in Armenia, which is really concerning for me. But anyways, a sticking point in the peace talks and this establishment of the route connecting Azerbaijan to its exclave of Nakhchivan through Armenian territory has been a major sticking point in the peace talks between the two countries. True, Azerbaijani officials, including Aliyev, had previously dubbed the proposed route the Zangezur corridor, which hinting that they wish to have control over the route. One incident had Aliyev and Pashinyan argue over the term after Aliyev had used it in a meeting with the SEEC in Moscow in May 2023, with Pashinyan accusing Aliyev of using an expression that in recent years has served as a title for putting forward territorial claims against Armenia, essentially referring to Zimbabwe as Rhodesia, or to the Congo as Zaire, is what they're arguing. Talks over the road had intensified after the two countries agreed to the terms of the peace deal in March 2025, with several actors, including them again, Turkey, Iran, and the US issuing several statements about it. Russia, which supports the establishment of the route, has more recently been quite vocal about the discontent at being pushed to the sidelines as the US ramped up its involvement in the peace talks. I'm gonna highlight this because this is one of the big things about this whole peace talk situation. Just the fact that Russia is being not talked about. No one even knows Russia exists right now when it comes to these peace talks. And these aren't like big countries. This isn't like a Russia-Ukraine situation where they have to involve them. But Russia is essentially considers itself the patron of these two countries. That's why Russia is more pissed about this. On 24th of July, Russian Foreign Ministry spokesperson Maria Zakharova suggested that Washington was co-opting talks over the road. The agreement signed by Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Russia that brought an end to the Second Nagorno-Karabakh War in 2020 included a route which Russia would guarantee the security of, though the agreement was scant on details, because of course it was. Iran, which maintains warm ties with Armenia and an uneasy, a really underwhelming word to use in this situation, relationship with Azerbaijan, has regularly criticized proposals for a Zangezur corridor. Most recently, a senior advisor to Iran Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei said that the corridor was a US and Israeli scheme to undermine Iran's national security and strategic ties, which he isn't exactly wrong about, because again, Azerbaijan has really strong ties to Israel, and I think I wouldn't be surprised within the next few months if Aliyev has a meeting with Netanyahu and Trump. I think they're essentially waiting to see what happens in Gaza before they make a decision, because by that point the ICJ could issue more warrants and stuff, because Azerbaijan isn't really as openly talking about the Israel-Palestine situation as the rest of the world, mainly because we are allies with Israel. That is the hard truth of it. I know it sucks, but it is what it is. Essentially, because Israel helped us in this war and we have a very strategic alliance with Israel, we can't really deal with the situation. Plus, Palestine is a very big supporter of Armenia, and my part of the world, we get very sensitive about these topics. My personal opinion is a no-state solution, nuke both of them. Okay, but on a more serious note, the people of Gaza and Palestine are being failed, and it sucks because there is no credible, I'm trying to think of a word right now. There is no reputable representation for them, because there is always going to be bad actors within Palestine that try to do some stuff, but on the other hand, Israel isn't really Israel isn't really a government that can be negotiated with. And I mean this in the worst, they are Neanderthalic way. Strong use, I know, but my idea is essentially people dislike Israel now because of Palestine. I dislike Israel for different reasons. And that's what I will leave it at for now with Israel. And let's go over to the second article, which is the explainer of how we got here in the first place. Now, this is a really good article. This is written by Javid Dagha, who is a journalist I follow on his platforms. Well, not just because of the last name. Anyways, explainer, what was behind the recent spat between Azerbaijan and Russia? The very public fallout between Baku and Moscow was arguably the most significant break in bilateral relations since they were first established. Very true. Azerbaijani-Russian relations have reached a new low in the past few weeks following raids on Azerbaijani diaspora centers in Russia, culminating in the death of two diaspora leaders in Yekaterinburg. While this violent incident was the catalyst for a now very public feud, The roots stretch far back and relate to a confusing web of relations between the criminal underworld and the Azerbaijani diaspora in Russia. Oh, this is going to be a fun read. Fair weather friends. Azerbaijani-Russian relations possessed a deep, intricate history rooted in centuries of shared geopolitical space. This is Russia-Iran wars, Gulistan, and Turkmenchai. And the territory of what is now modern-day Azerbaijan became part of the Russian Empire following the Russo-Persian Wars of 1804-13 and 1826-28, with the resulting treaties of Gulistan and Turkmenchai, ceding Qajar-Irani territories north of the Aras River to Russia. And after decades under Russian imperial rule, Azerbaijan achieved brief independence in 1918, which some people really still don't know about, which is actually why we have two independence days in Azerbaijan. We have the 28th of May and the 18th of October, which I will just check the reasons for. I believe the 28th of May was the 1918 one. I'll just check. Azerbaijan 1918 independence. Now, I know we have in the different independence days. I know this. This is my knowledge. I just got to fact check because I don't want to be wrong. And yes, so 28th of May 1918 was the first date, and 18th of October 1991 was the second date. Yep, 18th of October 1991, was Independence Day. Azerbaijan seceded from the Soviets, and then December we had proper government procedures following. So, back to this article. So after decades of Russian imperial rule, Azerbaijan achieved brief independence in 1918 before being annexed into the Soviet Union in 1920. And following the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, the relationship between the newly independent Azerbaijan and Russia evolved through distinct phases. Initial attempts by President Ayaz Mutalibov, the first leader of the independent Azerbaijan, to foster close ties were followed by a period characterized as anti-Russian under his successor Abulfaz Elchibay. Abulfaz Elchibay was elected around the wartime because the first Nagorno-Karabakh war, I believe, started in 88 or 89, but it ended in 94. That's essentially when Armenia captured 20% and started illegally occupying those lands, but we'll talk about that in a different situation. Essentially, Elchibay was, in my opinion, let down as I study history more. He was kind of let down by the government, and when Heydar Aliyev came in, Heydar Aliyev, I'm sure this article will get into, wasn't just some random scrub. Heydar Aliyev was a KGB connected, he was a Soviet bureaucrat. He was the secretary of the Azerbaijani SFR, and he also used to be the representative for Nakhchivan, I believe. I don't know his exact title, but he was very politically connected. He was very secretary of Azerbaijan. He was really connected in the Soviet school of politics, which is KGB dominated, and which is still where majority of Kremlin ideals lie. Anti-Russian under Abulfaz Elchibay. However, upon Heydar Aliyev's ascent to power in 1993, warmer relations were re-established. This re-engagement was notably influenced by the shared backgrounds of the KGB between Aliyev and Russian President Vladimir Putin, fostering a personal rapport that shaped diplomatic interactions, and with the Aliyev family, it is still present to this day. Now, one thing I will just do a little side note for. If you want to talk about an even funnier case of rule change and Russian control in the region, you can look at Chechnya, because in the first Chechen war, Akhmat Kadyrov was a very big hero. Akhmat Kadyrov was one of the men. There was another guy who I don't care to include right now, but in Chechnya, Akhmat Kadyrov in the first war was a revolutionary. He was the George Washington. And then, during the second Chechen civil war, Akhmat Kadyrov was essentially told by the Russian government that, we will put you in charge of an autonomous, Chechen Republic as long as you stay loyal to Russia. So, obviously, this caused Akhmat Kadyrov to switch teams, and then his son Ramzan Kadyrov came to power, and Ramzan Kadyrov is a character itself. That's a different video for a different day, but it is really entertaining, I promise. If you want to do a little bit of Googling now, That's your cue about the Ahmad Kadyrov, Ramzan Kadyrov. And Kadyrov spelled Kadyrov. I don't know, but like, just Ramzan Kadyrov, you will see him. He's a really funny looking ginger fella. Alright, from 1993 onwards, Russia and Azerbaijan developed robust economic and cultural ties. Russia emerged as a primary market for Azerbaijan's fruits and vegetables. That is very true. Exports and served as a vital transport corridor for Russian trade with Iran and other Middle Eastern partners. Azerbaijani business interests also secured significant assets within Russian construction, real estate, and trade sectors. Furthermore, Russia hosts a substantial Azerbaijani diaspora, with unofficial estimates suggesting that as many as 2 million ethnic Azerbaijanis residing there, most being migrant workers. Despite a robust economic relationship, the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict served as a persistent source of friction and a tool for Russian influence. I'm going to talk more about this after I'm done with this paragraph because it's a bit lengthy. Russia claimed neutrality in the conflict between Azerbaijan and Armenia, yet it simultaneously provided economic assistance and supplied weapons to both countries. I support both sides, so that way I come out on top every time. With the latter also hosting a Russian military base. At the same time, Moscow co-sponsored peace talks under the OSCE Minsk group and brokered the 1994 ceasefire. This dual approach meant that Russia historically leveraged the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict to maintain influence over both Armenia and Azerbaijan. Russia has these territories that it uses to leverage power and control over different SNG countries. Before they directly invaded Ukraine, there was Crimea, there was Donbass, and Donetsk was involved in Ukraine, if you want to go back to 2012. South Ossetia, Abkhazia in Georgia are current day examples of this happening. With Georgia, it's especially more important because Georgia is having a referendum, I believe, to join the EU. I don't know what exactly is happening. I can read the articles later, but essentially, they're having big EU pushes. Georgia wants to get into the EU. They are close to getting it. The government is just ruining it right now. And the current prime minister, I believe, or president, I think it's prime minister, he controls about a quarter of the country's GDP. And he's essentially like a Harvey Dent, where he has lived long enough to see himself become the villain now. Because he could have died a hero, but now he's a villain. Alright, Russia claimed... back to here. Yep. The dual approach also meant that Russia historically leveraged the area, and following Azerbaijan's significant military gains, solidified this role. It's 2020 peacekeeping deployments. Following Azerbaijan's significant military gains, solidified this role, providing Russia with a position to observe developments on the ground. Because Russian peacekeepers, spelled PIECE keepers, they were in charge of essentially controlling what happened, and that Zangezur corridor route we were talking about earlier in the other article, Russia was essentially supposed to be in charge of that route. So Russia was supposed to control everything between Azerbaijan and Armenia when it came to that transport within Nakhchivan, from mainland to Nakhchivan, Now, from an outsider perspective, the signing of the Declaration on Allied Interaction on 22nd of February 2022, just days before Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, put Azerbaijan on the aggressor's side. This document was intended to elevate bilateral relations to an allied level, emphasizing mutual respect for independence, state sovereignty, territorial integrity, and non-interference in each other's domestic affairs. It also committed both parties to refrain from actions that could harm their strategic partnership. The declaration represented a high point in formal relations, signaling a supposed deepening of ties. I can't read right now. For many, this was interpreted as Russia securing its southern flank, which it absolutely was. However, Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine and its related military weakness fundamentally altered the geopolitical landscape, profoundly diminishing Moscow's capacity and focus on the South Caucasus. This provided Azerbaijan with an unprecedented opportunity to reevaluate and rebalance its relations with Russia, leading to a more assertive and independent foreign policy that increasingly challenged Russia's traditional regional dominance. Now, the quickest version of translating this is the most common rule in war. You cannot win a war on two separate fronts. So Russia already has a front in Ukraine, that's the big one, and essentially the Kremlin's goal with this is, if they get Ukraine, Ukraine is the biggest post-Soviet country, and if they have Ukraine, that's more leverage for Kremlin to get a Kazakhstan, get an Armenia, get even an Azerbaijan on board to join them and recreate the Soviet Union, because that is the ultimate goal of the Kremlin. They are trying to rebuild a new Soviet Union that isn't based in communism, but based on essentially like a BRICS, but with like a Russia plus, an expanded Russia in the BRICS with China and India and South Africa and I forgot Brazil. So they essentially have this big alliance, this big assembly of the second world again, if you will, if you want to use the very old political terms. But essentially, this was one of the things: you can't fight a war on two fronts. So, because of the amount of resources Russia had to put into Ukraine in the first place, where it had to abandon its mission in Karabakh, the US and Azerbaijan particularly jumped on the opportunity to give a middle finger to Russia. Back to the article. Azerbaijan's lightning military campaign in September 23 resulted in its reclaiming full control of Nagorno-Karabakh. This decisive offensive led to the dissolution of the Nagorno-Karabakh Republic, which was illegitimate with the Armenians in charge, and the mass exodus of nearly the entire ethnic Armenian population from the region, an outcome that was unthinkable just a few years earlier. Now, I have a problem with this kind of statement. Now, there is an article attached that I haven't read, so I am very, very biased in saying this. But one thing that I will say is Azerbaijan wasn't really making an exodus in like a you all gotta F off kind of way. It was more of a if you choose to stay here, you will get Azerbaijani passports and you have to be subject to Azerbaijani law. And if you don't want to do it, I believe the 2020 invasion, this was also discussed after that. They had a deadline until about December 31st, or like a different deadline. I'm assuming this is talking about like a different deadline if it's talking September 2023. So I'm thinking November 31st, December 1st. They essentially gave the Armenians who lived in Nagorno-Karabakh a deadline that if you want to stay and become Azerbaijani with passports and stuff, feel free to do so. If you don't want to go, the way is yours. You can go home. And Armenians managed to go home in their vans, carrying all their stuff, like in their U-Hauls and stuff. The Azerbaijanis in the 90s, they had to walk barefoot through the winter. You know, like a little thing for you to think about next time you want to talk about this area. Anyways, despite its peacekeeping presence in Nagorno-Karabakh since the 2020 ceasefire, Russia did not intervene during Azerbaijan's September 2023 military campaign. This non-intervention was largely attributed to Russia being busy with its war in Ukraine, which diverted its attention and resources. In April 2024, Russian peacekeepers began to withdraw from the Nagorno-Karabakh, leaving the region under full Azerbaijani control. This withdrawal occurred a year before their mandate was due to expire, signaling a significant concession of influence. Now, Russia's retreat from its traditional backyard equaled lack of charisma in traditional Azerbaijani eyes. Some people, especially the elderly, used to believe that the origins of conflict in Nagorno-Karabakh were rooted in Russia instead of Armenia. Those voices, essentially, like a lot of the elderly thought that even like that generation of people with the Soviet ties were like, this is Russia working with the Armenians, like Russia is behind the Armenians, like that kind of mentality. And those voices became once more audible in the post-war Azerbaijan, leading to further waning of Russian influence. This level of Russian charisma in Azerbaijani public eyes reached a historic low after the crash of the Azerbaijani Airlines passenger jet. So, Christmas Day 2024, an Azerbaijani plane was supposed to fly to Grozny, which is in Chechnya, the capital of the region. Funny reference earlier. But Russian forces apparently diverted that flight, like the ATC diverted that flight, and they had to go to Kazakhstan to go across the Caspian Sea on very low fuel. Obviously, they couldn't really do it, and because of that, the plane crashed. The Azerbaijani government essentially told Russia that, like, yo, y'all messed up, this is your fault, admit fault, and Russia was like, we are very sorry for what happened. We are sorry for the things you're going through right now. We are not involved in the things that happened to you. Kind of like that situation. Anyways, the crash on Azerbaijan Airlines jet en route from Baku to Grozny on Christmas Day 2024, resulting in the deaths of 38 people. Azerbaijani authorities quickly attributed the crash of the plane being accidentally hit by Russian air defenses and criticized Moscow for attempting to cover up the incident, as well as for allegedly denying landing permission that could have averted the disaster. While Putin apologized to the Azerbaijani president for the tragic incident, he notably stopped short of acknowledging direct responsibility. This incident marked the beginning of the current downward trend in bilateral relations. Many believed that as a result, Aliyev declined to attend Russia's Victory Day parade in Moscow in May 2025, which he has a right not to do. The Victory Day is essentially, I believe it's May 9th or May 11th. It was essentially the day fascism was defeated, and it's essentially a big propaganda tool to revoke the good old times of nostalgia in the Soviet Union, because after that, the place went to shit. Tensions further escalated dramatically in June 2025 following the violent raids by Russian special forces in Yekaterinburg that targeted ethnic Azerbaijanis. According to Russia's version of the incident, the raids were in connection with the 2001 murder case. These raids resulted in the deaths of 2 Azerbaijani brothers while in police custody, which with Azerbaijani post-mortem investigations alleging torture. Several others were injured and dozens more detained. As a result, Azerbaijan cancelled a planned visit by the Russian Deputy Prime Minister Alexei Overchuk, called off a session of the Bilateral Inter-Parliamentary Commission in Moscow, and halted all Russian cultural events nationwide. This was a particularly big one in my opinion, because one thing that Russia had in my country and in the region is soft power. Russian cultural events were a big thing, and the fact that Azerbaijan cancelled them were essentially we are serious about breaking up with you this time. Azerbaijani authorities also raided the Baku office of Sputnik Azerbaijan, a Russian state media outlet, detaining staff who Azerbaijani media identifies as officers of Russia's FSB, along with other Russian nationals. Concurrently, Azerbaijani state-connected media published harsh criticisms of Russia, accusing it of historical ingratitude, political disrespect, chauvinism, and cruelty, and linking Yekaterinburg death to the mistreatment of labor migrants and the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Some went as far as to describe the actions of the Russian military in the Ukrainian cities of Bucha and Irpin, where Russian troops massacred hundreds of civilians, as genocidal. So Azerbaijan was really turning the heat up on Russia. In apparent reprisal, Russian authorities similarly cancelled cultural events and filed lawsuits against well-known Azerbaijani individuals. According to Lenta.ru, Haydar, the son of President Ilham Aliyev, is facing an approximately 1 million ruble in unpaid property taxes on a $35 million mansion in Moscow, Moscow's exclusive Barvikha neighborhood, while billionaire developer Aras Aghalarov is facing enforcement actions for allegedly building without permission. Aghalarov family is a really rich billionaire family, and Haydar, obviously, son of Ilham. The Aliyev family does have a history of having property outside Azerbaijan that is worth millions and millions, and offshoring some of the stuff, but that's a different video for another time. Enforcement actions against Aghalarov were started by Russian bailiffs on June 26th, the day before the Yekaterinburg raids. Aghalarov is one of 25 defendants who have been compelled to leave their property and follow court orders. Now, one thing about the Aghlarovs, Emin Aghalarov is a famous singer. Emin is a very known, famous, well-known singer in the region, and he's a bit of an oligarch. He's building a casino in Azerbaijan, which is something that got passed recently by the Milli Majlis. So this is essentially Emin's law, and that guy still cannot speak Azerbaijani. The guy is learning Azerbaijani. This is the level of oligarchs, and this is the level of patriotism we have in the country, where our people that are developing Azerbaijani land that are doing this cannot even speak a word of Azerbaijani. A performance by Russian Azerbaijani singer Emin Aghalarov, right on the money. The son of Aghalarov, Aras Aghalarov, in Svetlogorsk, was rescheduled from 6th of July 2025 to the following year. Reasons beyond the theater's control was the excuse given by the Amber Hall venue for the one-year postponement. Although the event organizers acknowledged the delay, they directed inquiries on the precise reasons to the artist's agents, because of course they did. Russian authorities maintained the Yekaterinburg operation targeted a criminal organization led by the Safarov brothers that had operated since the late 1990s. allegedly involved in drug trafficking, illegal alcohol and tobacco sales, gambling, prostitution, and pornography distribution. The authorities further allege that the organization was connected to murders in 2001, 2010, and 2011. This included the killing of an entrepreneur who refused to make protection payments, as well as possible links to mass alcohol poisoning in the city in 2021. Moscow has insisted that the detainees were Russian citizens of Azerbaijani origin arrested for serious crimes during a legitimate law enforcement operation. Putting the Safarov brothers' alleged criminal ties aside, it is a fact that within the Azerbaijan diaspora in Russia, mafia-connected figures fulfill enforcement and arbitration roles. Micro-run markets and businesses often fall under protection rackets controlled by the Azerbaijani criminal groups linked to so-called vorzakone, term for thief in law in Russian traditions. These groups leverage ethnic and kin ties to recruit, control labor, and enforce territorial order. This phenomenon is still very understudied, and it is very true. Azerbaijani vorzakones and just this general idea of criminals with mafia connections. Imagine Albanians and cocaine in the UK, but it's on a much smaller scale with Azerbaijanis in Russia. Mainly, the reason I say small scale is because it is very understudied. Even though, prominent figures include Nadir Salifov, Lotuguli, and Rovshan Lankeransky, both listed Azerbaijani crime bosses who built criminal syndicates controlling markets, trafficking, and rackets in Russia and beyond. Salifov, while in prison, is believed to have directed extortion against the Azerbaijani businesses across Russia and maintained control of Moscow's wholesale markets. Lankeransky is similarly believed to have commanded ethnic Azerbaijani criminal networks in Moscow's labor and produce markets, collecting protection fees and overseeing illicit trade until the assassination in 2016. Yeah, he was assassinated. Lankeransky is still revered in Azerbaijani society for his protection of Azerbaijanis in Russia. Essentially, a very... in mafia stories about the Italians and stuff, how they protect the community, that kind of stuff. Even though not reported in the media as much as the Yekaterinburg killings, Russia also arrested two such Azerbaijani Boverzakons in the same time frame: Zaur Nakhchivansky on July 2nd and Vagif Bakinsky on 4th of July. Nakhchivansky is the son of Bayram Talibov, himself a Vorzakon who was murdered alongside Hikmet Mukhtarov in 2006. Nakhchivansky was later adopted by Lankeransky, who subsequently raised him to Vorzakon status in 2013. According to Prime Crime, a Russian-language portal on the criminal underworld, Nakhchivansky is half Russian and baptized as an Orthodox Christian. Vagif Sleimanov, Vagif Bakinsky, is a Georgian Azerbaijani who is known as a rival of Lankeransky. He has been arrested numerous times for narcotics. When asked by police officers after being detained in July 25 about his Vorzakon status, Bakinsky refused to answer. Nakhchivansky agreed to speak off-camera. Prime Crime alleges that while a powerful criminal wing of the Azerbaijan diaspora still largely revolves around the Vorzakons of the two detained, Bakinsky in particular could become a serious bargaining chip in Moscow and Baku's diplomatic games. For now, a stateless individual, he has been remanded into custody for 3 months as the Yegorevsk at the Yegorevsk holding facility. So essentially, Russia is going to do what they did to the U.S. with Brittany Griner, except instead of a terrorist and a guy who was just selling guns to people, they are going to trade Hitler for Stalin. Essentially, that's the game plan they have with Baku. We have your criminals that your people kind of for protection and stuff, and because we can arrest these people and get them charged, imagine what we can do to regular civilians. Kind of that kind of games Russia is going to play. Anyways, Karl Roulette, an expert in international law and a graduate of the Albert Ludwig University of Freiburg, has argued that what is happening now between Azerbaijan and Russia should be viewed as an episode of more fundamental processes in Russia related to new redistribution of property. According to Lept, the Russian economy cannot sustain the war in Ukraine. Very true. So the Kremlin is patching the hole through nationalizations, including Moscow's Domodedovo airport, grain traders, warehouse holdings, and other businesses. In this context, Lept argues that Azerbaijani community in Russia, one of the country's wealthiest diasporas, cannot help but be selected as an appealing target. Yeah, because wealthy. However, Left has not dismissed the geopolitical layer, arguing that a new logistical and political architecture of the Caucasus is rapidly forming and Moscow has no place in this setting. If Armenia gets involved in the middle corridor, the Trans-Caspian Transport Corridor, Russia will effectively lose its natural bridge status between Europe and China. In turn, political scientist Shahin Jafarli has argued that Baku has wanted bilateral relations with Moscow to be based on the principle of sovereign equality. However, it became evident once again that Russia views an alliance and partnership with former colonies not on the basis of equal rights, but as a suzerain vassal relations. This type of relationship did not satisfy Azerbaijan's leadership, and after a series of events known and unknown to us, they once again realized that serious threats were emanating from Moscow. These are the underlying causes of the problems, Jafarli wrote on a Facebook post on June 30th. So essentially, the Kremlin played Russian roulette with Ukraine, and with what happened earlier with the Trump-Azerbaijan-Armenia agreement, the peace deal, Russia stopped playing the game with a revolver and instead switched to a semi-auto pistol. So that's essentially what's happened with Russia, and this is kind of what it's highlighting. Despite the heated diplomatic exchanges, the influence of warmongers, bloggers calls for harsher responses, and even military escalation. Neither Putin nor Aliyev commented on the elephant in the room. Even though Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky called to express his support to Aliyev, there is no reason to assume possibility for a new full-scale escalation or a new front against Russia in the South Caucasus. Russian Emergency Minister Alexander Kurenkov arrived in Baku on 7th of July to participate in a meeting on the Executive Council and General Assembly of the International Civil Defense Organization, ICDO. Nonetheless, Azerbaijani pro-government Telegram channels speculated that Kurenkov was also on an official mission mending strained relations, perhaps even relaying a message from Putin. The Azerbaijani side does not appear to be eager to continue its saber-rattling either, as evidenced by the government apparently opting not to confirm the rumored phasing out of Russian-speaking schools and banned a request for an anti-Russian protest to be held in the House of Assembly in Baku. While the media might be silent, however, the discussions behind closed doors still continue. So far, the news is not promising. The head of the Azerbaijani diaspora in the Moscow region, Elshan Ibrahimov, was deported from Russia on the 9th of July. Ibrahimov was deprived of citizenship on the 18th of June for committing actions that pose a threat to the national security of the Russian Federation. He has headed the National Cultural Autonomy of Azerbaijanis of the Moscow region since 2018 and was a close ally of Andrei Vorobyov, the governor of the Moscow Oblast. Perhaps unrelated to the topic, but interesting enough, Vorobyov isn't alien to the South Caucasus either. He was one of the few known soldiers of the Russian Odon, Special Operations Purpose Division, who was deployed to Sumgait, Baku, and later Yerevan to quell the nationalist riots and pogroms in the crumbling Soviet Union. This is the pogroms and the riots in Baku and Yerevan and Sumgait. They were the reasons that the war started. This expulsion could bring another harsh reaction from Baku. If one believes pro-government media, remember, they never post anything without knowledge of the presidential administration. The next target might be Russian language schools of Azerbaijan. This is, however, a topic for another article. For now, we can safely rule out any military escalation. At the time of writing this article, the Azerbaijani State Security Services had arrested two individuals, Ramil Aliyev, born 1991, and Ismail Hassanov, born in 1974, accused of them of enlisting in the Wagner armed group serving foreign mercenary units is considered a crime in Azerbaijan. It is hard to say whether the escalation will stop. Now, quick little fact about this article. This article was written before the Trump article. This was all before the Trump stuff. So let me just check the timestamp. Yeah, this was 11th of July. Now, this article and the Trump article is essentially Russia losing power in the region. Russia is done for. Russia has nothing to stand on. The only leg Russia had to stand on in the South Caucasus, at least, was the whole Nagorno-Karabakh corridor. But now there is these tit-for-tat battles Azerbaijan is having with Russia. Now, as this article mentioned, there is the closing of Russian schools and cultural centers, and just a fast shift from Russian culture in Azerbaijan, because as an Azerbaijani, as someone who is close to the region, we really don't like Russians, let me tell you. So we have to tolerate them, of course, because of their historical power, but Essentially, the Kremlin has too many issues to deal with, and for the next few years, my main predictions are this, and these depend on whether or not certain things happen. Now, I honestly am not really hopeful. I am really cynical of the Zengezur corridor situation that will happen between the US, Azerbaijan, and Armenia. I don't see why the US has that much of a skin in the game, because I think Trump is just going to get like the PR out of it. He's going to squeeze the PR juice out of it before saying, well, you're on your own. We have this very vague thing signed. But essentially, what I think is going to happen is that isn't going to get signed, and I think Russia will have to intervene again. Russia is going to have to play ball with both Armenia and Azerbaijan to kind of hijack the deal that got hijacked by the US. And whoever gets this Nagorno-Karabakh situation sorted, they're essentially going to be the biggest dominant force in the Caucasus. Russia, on the other hand, even without the Caucasus, still has a big issue. Their biggest issue, of course, right now is Ukraine. And what I think is going to happen is I think they're going to have to call Ukraine at some point. Because Ukraine has been going on for about 3 years now. In February, it's going to be 4 years. In a war, anything less than 2 years, in my opinion, is something that is way too fast. It is still fresh in memory, so it's still going to be treated as like, oh, this aggressive warmongering country. But anything longer than 7 years or like 6 years is where I'm draw the line on like, oh, this wasn't an easy wipeout as you thought. This wasn't really going to be, the thing you were hoping for. This wasn't going to be the destruction that you thought of. This wasn't going to be, your reputation of a blitzkrieg steamrolling through these people. That's why Russia is playing Russian roulette. For every year this war goes on, they have 6 chambers in the revolver, and they have 1 bullet in there. They're shooting for their first 3 years. They will shoot another year in February, and eventually that bullet's gonna gets lodged in their head. And if they lose this whole situation with the Azerbaijan and Armenia Caucasus deal, they might as well just reload. They might as well just take the bullet out of that revolver, put it in a Glock 17, and just shoot themselves. Because that's basically what's going to happen to Russia. The only thing holding Russia from complete collapse right now is what's happening in Georgia. Because European Union loves to take their sweet time with everything and just not deal with anything, especially because Russia has lost the influence it once had in the region, at least with Caucasus side. If this deal that Georgia is trying to get with the EU, if it doesn't get passed in time, or worse, if it doesn't get passed at all because of what the government is doing right now, we are in for a terrible time, folks. And that's the only thing keeping Russia's hopes alive. I think if Russia succeeds in Ukraine and at least gets about 40+% of the country, I think they'll try and get an ally in the Caucasus, or they'll try and sort like that part of their area out, their southern flank. Once that place gets figured out, or at least held away for the next, let's say, 5 years, they will rebuild, and then launch back into Ukraine until they take it. Once Ukraine falls, it's going to be the Caucasus falling next. We're going to get a big Soviet Union built in. Anyways, I've been Aga. This video is almost an hour long now, and thank you for listening to me yap for this hour. Have a great rest of your day. I will record another video soon about ranking province flags in Canada. That's going to be a really fun one. I look forward to recording that one. Until then, see you later. Toodle pip.